There are places in this world that carry weight, not because of what they look like, but because of what they hold inside. Graceland is one of those places. Sitting quietly on Elvis Presley Boulevard in Memphis, Tennessee, the White Column Mansion has welcomed millions of visitors since it first opened its doors to the public in 1982. Tourists have walked through the jungle room, stood silently beside the meditation garden, and stared at the gold records lining the walls. But for nearly 5 decades, every single one of those visitors walked away carrying the same unanswered question. What was up there? What was behind the door at the top of those stairs? The ones roped off with a simple velvet barrier and guarded by the same polite explanation year after year. The upstairs is private, out of respect for the family. For 48 years, nobody went up there. Not journalists, not biographers, not even close friends of the Presley family who had spent years inside those walls. The attic at Graceland became one of the most famous locked rooms in American history, and the mystery surrounding it grew with every passing decade. People whispered about what might be hidden inside. Some imagined stacks of unreleased recordings. Others pictured personal diaries, secret letters, or evidence of the truth behind Elvis's death. A few truly dedicated conspiracy theorists believe the attic might hold proof that Elvis Presley never died at all. Then, in January of 2025, the door finally opened. What the archivist found inside wasn't a conspiracy. It wasn't a treasure chest of scandalous secrets. What they found was something far more powerful, and in many ways, far more heartbreaking. They found a man, not the king of rock and roll, not the rhinestone-suited legend. They found the quiet, complicated, deeply human person that Elvis Presley had always been beneath the costume and the camera flashes. And understanding what was in that attic requires understanding the full story of the man who put it there. To understand why that attic mattered so much, you first need to understand what Graceland meant to Elvis himself. When he purchased the property in March of 1957, he was just 22 years old and already one of the most famous young men in America. The house, a colonial revival mansion originally built in 1939, sat on just over 13 acres of rolling Tennessee land on the southern edge of Memphis. He paid $102,500 for it, a sum that represented an enormous investment for a young man who had grown up in desperate poverty in Tupelo, Mississippi, sleeping in a 2-room shotgun shack with parents who sometimes couldn't afford food. Graceland wasn't just a status symbol for Elvis. It was proof. Proof that the boy who had been mocked for his second-hand clothes and his strange hair had made it. Proof that music had saved him. From the moment he moved in, he began reshaping the house in ways that reflected his personality, which was by any measure one of the most fascinating personalities of the 20th century. He installed a swimming pool. He built a barn with horses on the property. He added a racquetball court. He decorated rooms in bold, unapologetic style. Most famously, the jungle room with its waterfall, green shag carpet, and Polynesian-inspired furniture that looked like it had been lifted from a Hollywood film set. Elvis didn't hire interior designers who told him what tasteful people were supposed to like. He designed spaces that felt right to him. And if the world thought it was strange, that was the world's problem. But beneath all the flash and the color, Graceland had a quieter soul. In 1964, Elvis had a meditation garden built on the grounds, a serene, circular space with fountains, flowers, and stained glass panels. He would go there alone, sometimes late at night, to sit and think. People close to him described a man who was genuinely curious about religion, philosophy, and the nature of existence. He read voraciously, books on Eastern spirituality, Christian theology, numerology, and metaphysics. He had long conversations with friends about the meaning of life and what happened after death. The Elvis who played Vegas in a sequin jumpsuit was real. But so was the Elvis who sat alone in a garden at 3 in the morning, reading about the soul. Graceland held both versions of him. And when he died on August 16, 1977, both versions of him remained in that house, preserved, protected, and eventually locked away. August 16, 1977, began like most days had for Elvis in his later years. The curtains were drawn against the Tennessee summer heat. The house was quiet in that particular way that it got when Elvis had been awake through the night, and the staff knew better than to disturb him. He had been playing racquetball in the early morning hours with his girlfriend Ginger Alden and a few friends, which was not unusual. After the game, he went back upstairs with medication, a combination of prescription drugs that had become as routine for him as brushing his teeth. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, Ginger Alden knocked on the bathroom door. There was no answer. She pushed the door open and found Elvis unconscious on the floor. He was 42 years old. By 3:30 p.m., doctors at Baptist Memorial Hospital pronounced him dead. The official cause of death given by medical examiner Dr. Jerry Francisco was cardiac arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat. It sounded like a natural, if tragic, end for a man whose health had visibly deteriorated over the previous few years. But almost immediately, the story began to unravel. The toxicology reports that followed told a far more troubling tale. Elvis's system contained significant quantities of multiple prescription drugs at the time of his death, including codeine, morphine, Valium, and several other controlled substances. The sheer volume of medication in his body pointed not toward a simple heart failure, but toward the catastrophic toll of years of prescription drug dependency. At the center of that dependency was Dr. George Nichopoulos, known to everyone as Dr. Nick, who had served as Elvis's personal physician since 1967. Investigations conducted after Elvis's death revealed that in the final months of his life, Dr. Nichopoulos had prescribed Elvis thousands of doses of various medications. The numbers, when they eventually became public, were staggering. The Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners ultimately revoked Dr. Nichopoulos' medical license in 1995, finding that his prescribing practices had been grossly excessive and inappropriate, not just with Elvis, but with other patients as well. But even that finding couldn't fully close the chapter on how Elvis died. In 2020, author Sally Hodel published research suggesting that Elvis may have suffered from a genetic condition called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, a hereditary disorder that affects liver and lung function and would have made his body far more vulnerable to the effects of prescription medication. If Hodel's research is accurate, then Elvis wasn't simply a man with a drug problem. He was a genuinely sick person whose underlying health issues were poorly understood and poorly managed by the medical professionals around him. The full truth of what killed Elvis Presley has never been cleanly resolved. What is clear is that when the gates of Graceland closed behind the last mourners in late August of 1977, the house entered a period of frozen grief, and the attic above it became sealed shut. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, was the one who made the decision to lock everything down. He was a broken man after his son's death. He had already endured the loss of his wife, Gladys, in 1958, a loss that had devastated Elvis so profoundly that those who knew him said he was never quite the same afterward. Now, 2 days after Elvis was buried at Forest Hill Cemetery, a group of men attempted to break into the cemetery and steal the coffin. The attempt failed, but the violation was profound. Vernon had his son's body, and his wife's, moved to the meditation garden at Graceland, where he believed they would be safer under private security. Then he went further. He secured the perimeter of the entire property. He hired round-the-clock guards. He installed extensive alarm systems. And he closed off the entire upper floor of the mansion, including the attic, to everyone. The official explanation offered to the public was simple. The family's private spaces deserved to remain private. Elvis's bedroom, his bathroom, his personal sanctuary, these were not exhibits to be photographed and gawked at. That explanation was entirely reasonable and, by most accounts, entirely genuine. But as the years passed and Graceland opened its doors to tourists in 1982, as millions of visitors came and went, and the velvet rope at the bottom of the staircase remained firmly in place, the explanation began to feel insufficient to many people. The mystery calcified into legend. Lisa Marie Presley, who inherited the estate and managed it for decades, was asked about the upstairs rooms many times throughout her life. She was consistent. She knew what was up there, she respected her father's wishes that it remain private, and she had no intention of changing that. She died in January of 2023, leaving the estate to her daughter, Riley Keough, and the locked attic to whatever fate Riley would decide for it. Before Riley could make any decisions about the attic, she found herself in the middle of a crisis that threatened to take Graceland away from the Presley family entirely. In the spring of 2024, a company called Nosany Investments and Private Lending filed legal documents in Tennessee claiming that Riley Keough had defaulted on a loan of approximately $3.8 million secured against Graceland itself. According to the filing, the property was to be auctioned off to satisfy the debt. The news sent shockwaves through Elvis's fanbase. The idea that Graceland, the shrine, the cultural landmark, the place where Elvis and Gladys and Vernon were buried, could end up in the hands of strangers was almost incomprehensible. Riley's legal team responded swiftly and aggressively. They filed emergency papers in Shelby County claiming that the entire thing was a fraud. Riley, her lawyers argued, had never signed any loan agreement with Nosany Investments. The signatures on the documents appeared to be forgeries. Someone, for reasons that were never entirely made clear, had attempted to manufacture a fake debt in order to force the sale of one of the most valuable properties in American cultural history. The judge hearing the case agreed to examine the matter urgently. When the scheduled auction date arrived, not a single representative of Nosany Investments appeared in court to defend the filing. The judge halted the auction, declared Graceland a unique cultural asset of extraordinary public importance, and ruled that the sale could not proceed. Graceland remained in Presley family hands. The episode shook Riley deeply. It was a reminder of how many people, some of them operating far outside the boundaries of the law, believed they had some claim on Elvis Presley's legacy. It may also have played a role in what she decided to do next. Shortly after the legal battle concluded, Riley Keough made an announcement that stunned the Elvis world. She was going to authorize the opening and professional archiving of the Graceland attic, the locked room that had not been entered since August of 1977. In January of 2025, a small and carefully selected team of professional archivists arrived at Graceland before dawn. They wore white cotton gloves. They brought acid-free storage materials, high-resolution cameras, cataloging equipment, and enough humidified transport containers to handle whatever they might find. They had been briefed on the general history of the space, but had no specific knowledge of its contents. Nobody living did. The staircase that had been roped off for 48 years was now accessible. They climbed it slowly, aware that they were walking through one of the most significant threshold moments in American cultural preservation history. At the top, a narrow hallway led to a plain wooden door. The lead archivist carried an old brass key that had been held by the Presley family since Elvis's death. Nobody had used it in nearly 5 decades. When the key turned and the door swung open, the team stood still for a moment. The smell hit them first: old wood, old paper, old fabric, and something else underneath it all. Something that older archivists sometimes describe when entering a truly untouched space. The particular scent of preserved time. The attic was larger than any of them had expected. It ran the full length of the house, lit by dormer windows covered with thick blackout curtains that had kept out nearly 50 years of Tennessee sunlight. A small window air conditioning unit hummed in the corner. It had apparently been maintained by the Graceland maintenance staff, who serviced it from outside the building, keeping the climate inside stable without ever entering the room itself. That climate control had been essential. It meant that everything inside was in far better condition than it might otherwise have been. What struck everyone immediately was the organization. This was not a room where things had been thrown in haste. Every item had been placed deliberately. Dozens of cardboard boxes lined one wall, each labeled in a handwriting that archivists later confirmed matched Elvis Presley's own hand. The labels read like chapters in an autobiography. Tupelo. First recordings. Army. Hollywood.